Mick Cronin made his message loud and clear. He benched 4 of the 5 starters, including Donovan Dent, and the results were a bit mixed. The Bruins dominated Sac State. The players off the bench, though, didn't respond like I would have hoped.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for your support. Welcome back, everydayers. Tune into the Locked On Sports Podcast Network, #1 sports podcast network out there. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. What was interesting and what was supposed to be a very boring post-game recap has become somewhat noteworthy. Mick Cronin came out and absolutely berated his team with his message sent. Post-game, Mick Cronin said there was no message sent. He just went with who is the best in practice. Well, that's what we're talking about today. The starting lineup, we're talking about UCLA and is Donovan Dent in some sort of rut offensively? And then we'll talk about bracketology at the end, where UCLA sits nationally through the first couple of weeks of the season. Right now, UCLA is 4-1. Cool. All those wins are cupcake victories where there are some sore spots in home wins. And then a close back and forth loss to Arizona in the Intuit Dome. No games away from SoCal. No games away from the greater Los Angeles area. And that's where UCLA sits right now. The starting 5, Steven Jamerson, Jamar Brown, Brandon Williams, Trent Perry. The only returning starter was Eric Daly Jr. And if you've heard or listened to Eric Daly Jr. speak, read anything about what's been covered about EDJ, even what I've talked about here on Locked On UCLA, EDJ is the tough-nosed competitor who literally played with a broken nose last year. Mick Cronin's going to love that guy. So what UCLA is bringing to the table here, though, is the fact that this is a team that just hasn't played energized, hasn't played with any heart coming out of the locker room against teams that just don't have it, which has been the majority of their schedule other than Arizona. And even when they came out with some energy and intensity, the Bruins couldn't close it out. Hence, we saw the performance, what the Bruins did against the Wildcats. Couldn't close out a game against Arizona where they led and had a chance to get a marquee victory over a top 5 team in the country. That means UCLA benched Donovan Dent, benched Tyler Bilodeau, Xavier Booker, and Sky Clark. And you're like, okay, who took the message well? Booker scored a lot of points, had a good amount of rebounds, had 5 turnovers, and had 4 personal fouls. So I'm like, okay, easy buckets, but it was an undersized Sac State team whose best big man got hurt early in Jeremiah Cherry. And you're like, okay, well, Booker dominated against a very undersized Hornets team and still had a lot of turnovers and a lot of personal fouls. Tyler Bilodeau wasn't shooting the ball well, didn't get into a flow, a couple of turnovers, actually fouled out of this game in 18 minutes and played that coming off the bench. So that means he didn't play a lot of impactful minutes in this game. Then you had Donovan Dent. Dent shot poorly, 2 of 9. Didn't come in until the under 12 media timeout. Had 7 assists, but missed the majority of his free throws, missed 4 or 5 free throws, missed 7 shots from the floor, had a couple of steals. His 7 assists showcase how good of a point guard he is, that even if he's not fully engaged, that he can still facilitate the offense. We'll touch more on him in a second. Sky Clark came out there, 20 minutes, 9 points, hit 3 threes, including a couple of deep ones. All right, and Sky Clark also fouled out. Mick Cronin had a slight bugaboo that this game was a foul fest, which it certainly was. UCLA whistled for 25 personal fouls. Sac State also whistled for 25 personal fouls. So in a game where you didn't need to see a combined 54 free throws, that was a non-story, but it was a part of the reason why some of these stars didn't play a lot of minutes. What Cronin talks about post-game was in the beginning when UCLA blitzed Sac State to a 13-0 start, the Bruins and their backup starting 5 had 33 deflections. That first half, 33 deflections. In the second half, where Sac State scored a few more points, was a bit even in the scoreboard with UCLA. UCLA had 9 deflections. Now you could argue that there are a lot more free throws and a lot more whistles in half number 2, but the effort and the intensity was different. UCLA started with the Jamerson Brown, Williams, Perry, and Daly Jr. lineup compared to UCLA's regular starting 5 coming out of the locker room in the second half to start and having a low intensity beginning to half number 2, where just like there's a bit of a lull in this game. Sac State only scored 17 points in the first half. UCLA had 42. You're like, okay. The Hornets only made 24% of their shots, missed a lot of their free throws, had a few turnovers, 13. Mick Cronin's teams have forced a lot more, but it was the fact that there's intensity, effort, and playmaking by the Bruins. This is one of those games you look at, you're like, wow, Jamar Brown had a good game. 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 10 points. Trent Perry, 11 points, couple of made threes, showcased the good for the rising sophomore. And EDJ, his jump shot wasn't falling, but he still put in a double-double effort in 30 minutes. 15 points, 10 boards, 4 assists. You're like, okay, that's how a starter is meant to play. And even Jamerson looked like he had a lot of effort. 2 blocks, a steal, couple of rebounds, tweaked his ankle. His status for the rest of this week is a bit unclear, but I think he came back in, played 10 minutes, and hopefully he's good to go. He's a guy that if Mick Cronin put him in at the end of the Arizona game, the Bruins could have held out with energy and intensity defensively and maybe closed out the Wildcats instead of using Booker at the end of the Arizona game. So he came out, started well, got a little hurt, and unfortunately we didn't get to see Jamerson go to work, go to town on a bit of an injured front line for Sac State. Jamar Brown, some good minutes. Brandon Williams is still really finding his footing. And you can see the difference between a team 2 years ago that was very mediocre for UCLA standards and Mick Cronin standards, where he was a starter in some of those games his freshman year, wasn't even strong enough and good enough to compete in last year's roster, which had a lot more talent top to bottom. And then you have Brandon Williams, where he's still kind of really trying to figure it out in his redshirt sophomore campaign. But by the time it's all said and done, you got Peoples Jr. in the game for a couple of minutes, Christian Ori. You even got Jack Seidler knocking down a big-time bucket and getting the bench excited in the final minute when you got the walk-on getting a big bucket. So you're like, all right, everybody's excited, making buckets. But then you're like, even the guys that are normally starters didn't put up big numbers. They weren't feeling it. Tyler Bilodeau missed 4 of his 5 shots, 3 assists, couple of steals, but fouled out. Wasn't the only regular UCLA player that fouled out coming off the bench. And some of that is dictated by how the referees call the game. But you're like, okay, the bench players brought the intensity, but why aren't these guys keeping it out of the locker room up 25? Why are they not bringing it to where Mick Cronin's playing some of those starters, quote unquote, late in this game in the final part of it? And one of the quotes I found interesting was Mick Cronin said, I think, he didn't say I think, but I believe what he was saying in the postgame presser was the fact that this unit that started the game beat the other guys by 20 in practice the other day. By 20. And when I mentioned long-term that the Arizona loss would be good, Cronin always goes to work. Intensity, physicality, and if you think he is chipper, sarcasm implied, during regular practices when he was leading up to the Arizona game, taking a loss to the U of A, the way it happened at the Intuit Dome, yeah, UCLA has got to go back to the drawing board, and that's what he's going to do. Demands. And when you're playing the Sac States, the Presbyterians of the world, you have another month before you even sniff a real good game like you're going to against Gonzaga in Seattle. You got to bring the intensity, and Cronin's trying to do it, but for some reason, the starting 5 just does not have it. And the question remains to be asked, is this the Donovan Dent problem? Is he still a little banged up? Is he just not vibing with the Mick Cronin style? Or is he just overrated? We'll answer all those questions next on Locked On UCLA. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And even if you missed the start of the game, or if you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who'll score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So here's the question. Does UCLA, through 5 games in, have a Donovan Dent problem? Well, his numbers are way down since coming from Sac State, since coming from New Mexico. In the Sac State game, UCLA saw him come off the bench till the under 12, so that means the first 8 minutes of the game, he was not a factor in this game. And then he didn't perform all that well. UCLA has held him out of a game, the West Georgia game, prior to the Arizona game, because Mick Cronin said he was a bit banged up. And something just hasn't seemed quite right with Donovan Dent right now. I'm going to get very numbers heavy with you, so bear with me if you're listening at home. But Donovan Dent just doesn't look like that super impact player consistently, especially as a scorer, because his numbers are way, way down. He's not doing it efficiently. Cronin's not going to like it that way. And despite his 7 assists and I think 0 turnover night, if you don't play any defense or you're not a ridiculous scorer, and you're not there engaged in the game the way Mick Cronin wants you to be defensively, then you're going to sit the pine. No matter how much money in NIL that UCLA was able to push forward, close to what, $3 million to bring Dent, one of the top 2 transfers from New Mexico. In the transfer portal overall, Donovan Dent was one of the top ads in the country. And so far, it's been a little bit of a sluggish pace. This is what I mean. Last year, as the Mountain West Player of the Year, a guard that led a New Mexico team to a win over a lot of his current UCLA brethren on a neutral court in dominant fashion, mind you, this is what Donovan Dent was able to do. He averaged 20 points per game, shot 49% from the field. His first 2 years as a freshman and a sophomore, shot over 50% from the field. His three-point numbers steadily increased from 21% to 37% to last year, just a shade under 41%. Limited attempts, he only made 27 out of 66, but when he was shooting it, he was hitting 1 to 2. He was hitting 2 out of 3, 2 out of 5 over a course of a few games, and that just hasn't been the case this year, all right? Now, looking at the free throw numbers. As a career free thrower coming into UCLA, he shot at 73%. His first 2 years, he was about a 68%er. Last year, doubled the amount of makes, doubled the amount of attempts that he got to the line, and ended up being a 78% free thrower, making 178 at the line. You add that with 48 steals, 30 blocks, and you're like, man, this dude with 220 plus assists is the perfect point guard. The Tiger Campbell, but so much better. But then let's talk about those numbers, all right? Right now, Donovan Dent shooting 36%. That is a career low by a wide margin. Last year was a career low, and that's because Dent was asked to do so much offensively that it wasn't necessarily his fault, it just dipped to 49%. Here, it's down to 36%, today being his worst shooting night, the least amount of field goals he had, and he still took almost 9 to 10 shots, 2 of 9, worst night from the field. From three-point land so far, he's 1 of 7. He missed 3 threes and hasn't made a single three-point shot since opening night against Eastern Washington, shooting 14% from 3. And while I did hype up those three-point numbers in the offseason, he doesn't shoot it at a ridiculous clip in terms of volume, but you'd think average-wise it would work. It so far just has not. At the free throw line, largely had been decent. Against Arizona, Dent didn't get to the line or make an impact. He had 1 free throw attempt. Against Sac State, he went 1 for 5. Against Pepperdine, he went 6 of 9. And there are times against Eastern Washington, it looked like he could have gotten to the line at will. With the continuation rule now implied and now enforced in college, you would think Donovan Dent would get to the cup, get fouled, continue, get to the line, be a walking three-point bucket in the old-fashioned way. But no, his numbers, 63%, are worse than his freshman and sophomore year numbers. Rebounds, close to his career average. Right now, his assists, 28 to 6. He had 9 assists game 1, 8 assists against Arizona, 7 assists, 0 turnovers against the likes of Sac State. And now, while Mick Cronin's trying to find the average, of assist to turnover, ratio, right there is a good average. And that's going to make Mick Cronin smile, whether he wants to or not. But the defensive intensity, the ability to be engaged in the game, doesn't look like it's there if you're watching Donovan Dent all the time. And considering he was held out hurt, you wonder if maybe there's things that we just don't know behind the scenes, if the transition just hasn't been working as well, because we saw the friction led to the end of the UCLA Amato relationship. Amato went out, had a huge game early on for one of the top ranked Big Ten teams in Michigan. And imagine what UCLA could be right now if Dent could be lobbing to a 7'3 Spaniard in the post. They'd be formidable. They wouldn't be worrying about defensive rebounds. They wouldn't be worrying about a whole lot of things that Mick Cronin's questioning about toughness, defensive rebounding, the ability to score at will in the paint, show some effort and intensity. That would be a whole nother ball game for Dent to lob it to somebody in the paint who is just a walking bucket, rebound, or just a shot blocker like Mata was turning himself into at the end of the season when healthy and when available. Well, now look at Dent. You're like, Dent so far had 21 points, 9 assists game one on 47% shooting, and hasn't been anywhere close to that since game one. Under 38%, under 31%, and then shooting now close to 20% as his average scoring wise has dipped by a full 9 points. Started the season averaging 21 points per game. Now, after a 5-point effort against Sac State coming off the bench, when Cronin, who quote unquote said he's not trying to send a message, he doesn't do that. Well, he clearly did, regardless of what he said in his post-game presser, clearly did by the way his starting lineup was and the handling and treatment of Donovan Dent, 12 points. Now, if Dent is a little hurt under the weather, whatever it may be, maybe he's trying to light a spark under a superstar point guard. Because you don't just go that hard after a point guard. You don't go out there and challenge him in your meetings and say, hey, you need to get better defensively. This is what it's going to take for you to get to the NBA. You're not some all-world top 10 lottery pick. You might be at the college game, but you won't be at the NBA. And he challenged him in that meeting. And Dan eventually chose UCLA over the likes of Kentucky, where Kentucky probably could have paid him even more, and maybe Dent would be flourishing a Mark Pope system. Well, at the moment, it's not exactly working. Now, it's not like Dent was horrific against Arizona, 11 points, 8 assists. He came out, but the problem is it's a lot of volume shooting without the efficiency. And the defense that he brought last year, those numbers, 0 blocks. Last year, as a Lobo, he had 30 blocks in a year. 30. Now, or this year, he has 6 steals. Last year he had 48. So those numbers might steadily rise over the course of a 30 to 35 game season. You're like, okay, well, let's see about the averages. Well, he's not that dynamic defensive guard that Kobe Johnson was. He's not the same thing that Jalen Clark is, not the defensive wizard that a Dembona was, athletic in the paint. And he's not a big 7'3 guy who's going to go block and clean up the mistakes. UCLA doesn't have that. And Cronin is trying to out-tough his team and trying to mentally turn it into something with this team. And I'm not sure that's what Donovan Dent has. I'm not sure that's what this team has overall. But I'm trying to figure out, what's this team going to be as a defensive unit? Cronin's trying to figure it out. And the one thing he didn't recruit this year, or doesn't have on the roster this year that's developed, is a super defensive wizard. It's a mindset and intensity, and that's why he's trying to over-aggressively instill it into his team that we need to be a collective unit defensively. Because if you're not, we're going to suck on defense against better teams. Now, that Arizona game was played to UCLA's pace with Mick Cronin. Sac State only shot 24%. And yet, there are still some things that are works in progress about intensity, effort, coming out of the locker room. Why does it take your second 5 to do that against a starting 5 that would be highly coveted by quite a few teams across the country if you pluck them off one by one? The Sky Clarks, the Dents, the Bilodeaus, the Xavier Bookers of the world, who was one of the top tier recruits out of high school. And we're still playing this game. So does UCLA have a Donovan Dent problem? No, not yet. But it is something to keep an eye on. Is he hurt like he missed a game a week ago? Is there something going on behind the scenes? Or does he just need to fill it in and up the ante? Because Mick Cronin asks a lot of his point guard. Didn't work for Dylan Andrews. It took Tiger Campbell 4 years to materialize overall into a superstar point guard. Now, yes, he led that UCLA team that was going to the Final Four, but he had some superstar guards with the Johnny Juzangs of the world and the Jules Bernards and the Jaime Jaquez Jr.'s. Donovan Dent is supposed to be the Tiger Campbell and the Jaquez and the Juzang all at once. And I think that's the difference, and that's why we're not seeing the success so far right now. Because he is Tiger Campbell, but he's trying to be the Jaquez and the Juzang all at once. And we need the other guys to step up, take the pressure off his shoulders, and Dent needs to start knocking down some shots and building some confidence. And if he's hurt, well, then UCLA's got to bring the intensity so Dent doesn't have to overdo himself in the non-conference against mediocre competition. Because why is UCLA hanging around with some of these teams when they can win this by 40, win this by 50, and they're just not? Or in other cases, win it by 30 when they're beating Eastern Washington by 6 points. So we'll see what happens with that. And thus, that's why Joe Lunardi's bracketology is the way it is. All right. And that was the latest one dropped today. So let's talk about it next, about how this harmful non-conference has hurt UCLA so far. All right, so the day I'm recording this podcast, we have a Joe Lunardi drop of a bracketology, which is about once a week at this point before it starts becoming a twice a week thing and then eventually a daily update when we get the throes of March Madness. Well, right now, we're early stages of the season, mid-November, and UCLA has plummeted. They're down to a top 20 team in the country. Some have had them ranked in the top 10. Some still believe that a loss to Arizona on a neutral site by 4 points when leading for the majority of the game is no reason to drop them from top 10 or top 15 into the top 20. Well, if you're looking at this UCLA bracketology or this ESPN's bracketology by Joe Lunardi, you would see that UCLA is already feeling the pains of the weak mid-majors and the inability to beat Arizona. Case in point, Arizona right now, because they beat Florida and UCLA on neutral floors, they're playing the West region as the 2 seed. Now, UConn's the 1 seed, but Arizona playing in San Diego and then San Jose, that is the place Arizona wants to be. They'll take that all day, every day. Heck, even USC is an 8 seed in the West region. So then we come back to where UCLA is currently. The Bruins, on Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology release, a 5 seed in the East. We've played this game before. You don't want to do that. You do not want to do that. Now, yes, 5 seed is much better than a 7 seed going to the eastern side of the country when they had to go to Lexington. But you know what's on the East? Your regionals will include Greenville, Philadelphia, Tampa, and Buffalo potentially if you go in the East. And oh, by the way, you win that, you go to Washington, D.C. You think Cronin's want to do all that Big Ten travel and then go to Philly like Joe Lunardi's shaping this regional to be? Then go back to D.C. and then somehow find a way to make it to the Final Four with this team? That's not a recipe for success. No. No, 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 no. And yes, while UCLA had to travel to Indiana for the Final Four that one time, that's because it was sequestered in a bubble and everybody was in the same spot, same time, and the Bruins had grown together as a unit and went on a magical run. Now almost 4.5 years ago, which is crazy to say for Mick Cronin's only Final Four berth as a head coach. Now, there should have been more if Jalen Clark doesn't get hurt and if Tim Bona doesn't get hurt, but we digress. What UCLA is missing is that signature win. You have Illinois, who shot up to a 2 seed. You've got all these other teams like Purdue, the number 1 overall seed. You have Michigan State, who this very evening thumped Kentucky by 20-plus points on a neutral site. Michigan State's a 5 in the South region. They're going to leapfrog. Michigan is another top-tier team that's a 2 seed in the East. So you're like, man, how can UCLA catch a break? Well, you got to make your own breaks. They can't be losing too many of these non-conference matchups, which they shouldn't to anybody other than Gonzaga in Seattle. But if UCLA's potential seeding is going to rest upon beating Gonzaga, and if they lose that game, they're going to be a 6 or even worse and travel east. They're not going to give UCLA that respect. They'll put them in if UCLA's mediocre. They'll get in that field just like how North Carolina was. But the problem is they got to start looking impressive, build their resume for the Nets, which comes out soon, look good in KenPom because they keep falling down the KenPom rankings. And if you're looking at Joe Lunardi, he's like, yeah, why should we respect this UCLA team that hasn't done anything against weak competition, and in their only test against good competition, they lost it. And it was a game that was just a few miles away from Westwood. It's a neutral site game, so it's not going to hurt as much, but UCLA's got to start picking it up, which we've said over and over again. The Arizona game was one of their best performances. Now, they have to win those games. They don't get another opportunity for a month. So they better figure it out when they play the Presbyterians, the Cows, the Arizona States of the world, and not mess that up. Because if UCLA is anything other than, 12-1 heading into the new year, if you include those Big Ten matchups in early December, you're going to be hurting for a good seed. And you can't be doing that because you'll get shipped to the East Coast. So those are things to keep in mind. Until next time, we'll have a crossover with Locked On Huskies host Roman Tomashoff. We'll have more UCLA basketball, football news, and everything on the coaching search in future episodes. And we'll continue to preview UCLA Washington. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.